Okay, we're going to finish up James chapter 4 today and probably get into chapter 5 as well. And perhaps finish up chapter 5 next week, and in 2 weeks we'll be back in Exodus. That's at least a possibility. So we'll see how that goes. James 4, beginning in verse 13. It's not a very strong signal. I got one thing. So the last 2 weeks it's gone for about 11 minutes and then cut off. So yeah, I don't know what's happened. Worked well for months. So James chapter 4, beginning in verse 13. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to the one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. What do we think about that?
In our place in the sense that as human beings, we have a limited time on this earth. And sometimes we don't look at it that way. So it kind of says, hey, you missed it. So if you understand that and accept that, then it kind of makes the way you view life and God and Jesus a little bit different, I believe. Quite a bit different. That there is. And it kind of shocks you, I guess, especially as I've gotten older. I look at the years that have gone by and it just seems like it's easier to comprehend now, I guess. I'm not sure why that it was when I was younger. Like 30, 40 years later. If I've got 4 months or 4 weeks, I don't know. So it kind of puts reality right where it should be.
A few months before she died, my grandmother came over to our house, my parents and I guess I was in the same town. I don't remember. I guess I wasn't living with my parents at that point, but I was in the same town. And grandma came over to visit, and she told me a bunch of stories about when she was a little girl. And she was 86, which is a full good run. But, you know, some people in here have already beaten that, and no signs of slowing down. But that's how long she made it. And this was over 25 years ago, so she would be really old now if she was still alive. But she told a story on herself when she was a little girl. She would get up in the morning, and they lived out on a farm. She would get out in the morning and run down to see her mom, who was already out doing chores and stuff like that. She'd go, first thing she'd do, get up and run down and see her mom in her nightgown. And she'd get her nightgown all muddy and dirty and wet and everything from the morning dew and all that. And she just got switched all the way back up to the house for running out down there in her nightgown. So the next morning she got up and she just took her nightgown off and ran down to see mom. And she got switched even harder all the way home for running around naked. So, but she told that story, and it was like it was happened yesterday to her, even though she's pretty advanced in years. And life is a vapor in that sense. It may seem like when we hear ages, I think I saw something, a woman died recently in America. I think she was a nun or something, and she was over 110 or something like that. It happens that people live super centurions or whatever they call them, but it is rare. But even for them, I'm sure when they, at the end of their life, when they start looking back, they can see that it all went by very quickly, really. And that's I can tell that story on Grandma now because she's not around, but she told it on herself. She was fine with it, but it's it is a vapor, and you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're making the choices you make in life. What am I going to do? What career am I going to have? How am I going to live my life on a daily basis? The fact that life is relatively short is an important thing. At the same time, if we obsess on the brevity of life, we don't get a whole lot done, do we? You know, the old John Kennedy, I guess it was a story he told. Somebody, I think he was a French politician, wanted to plant a certain kind of tree outside his house, and the gardener said, this tree takes 110 years before it even blooms or whatever. And Kennedy said, well, we got to, the politician said, well, we better plant it today, if we're going to, so it's kind of both. And we have this billionaire right now that's wanting to put people on Mars. And he's, in a sense, still a pretty young man, but I think he's in his 50s, if not late 40s. And I think it may well be beyond his lifetime before we're able to really do that. I think we're going to have a hard time putting people on Mars on a one-way ticket. We're going to have the technology to put them there and bring them back. And that is the real trick. It would be easy to send them there and leave them there. The hard part is getting them back. And a lot of people, it's amazing how many people have signed up to want to go to Mars on a one-way ticket. I think a lot of them, once they got there, would be like, no, this isn't all I thought it would be. There's no McDonald's on Mars. What am I doing here? And there would be just this global crowd cry, bring them back. And I would not be one of the ones crying that personally if they signed up for it, but some people would. And I think that is a long way off. And this relatively young man with a lot of brilliance and wealth, I think it's still going to be beyond his lifetime before we're able to send people to Mars and bring them back. I think that's still not real doable. But we'll see. Maybe he's right, and he's been right about some stuff, and maybe not so right about other things, but he certainly is a very smart guy. So we'll see what happens. So there's this, this in the text is really, in a sense, balancing kind of vision with presence. What do we want to do? What does the future hold? Where can we accomplish? And at the same time, thinking about the fact that you're here today and you're gone tomorrow. Life is a vapor. You need to appreciate where you're at. You need to give where you're at to God, and you need to give what you hope for in the future to God. They both belong to God. Your present circumstances should be about honoring God with your life, and what you hope to do in the future should be about honoring God in your life. And I think that's something that most of us we don't think long term about. How do I honor God prospectively? Where am I going to be at in 10 years that I can honor God in a new way, in a different way, in a greater way? How do I grow spiritually? And James is reminding them, of course, that you don't even know if you're going to be here in 10 years. I hate those, it's been a long time since I went to a job interview where they asked this, but the whole thing is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because I guess I'm just not really a visionary. I don't see that far down the road. I have goals. I have things I would like to do. I don't know how long they're going to take. I don't even know if they're going to actually be accomplished. To me, the process is the important part, not really the result. Alabama's got a great football coach right now, and that's his whole theme, his own mantra is process. Process, process, process. If you do the right things the right way, you'll get the right results eventually. And Alabama football has done pretty well with that approach, and yet, football fans, we want result. But the result only comes after doing it a certain way. And really, if you cut corner, even if you get away with it, even if you achieve what you want to achieve, if you do it improperly, the glory is fleeting for sure. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I'm not saying I'm like him or anything. I'm not, but I think we have to live today and look forward to the future with the mindset of just doing what God wants us to do and being the type of people he wants us to be, and let God take care of the result. Know that it's not really up to us to bring about the result, that it's God that does it. As Paul says in 1 Corinthians, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. We did what we were supposed to do. We did what God called us to do. But it wasn't about us bringing about a certain result, because that may or may not actually happen. It's kind of really a sort of human arrogance to think we're going to live long enough and we're going to actually accomplish a lot of goals in our life. I think it's I think it's good to have goals, and I think it's good to work towards a result, but to be patient with ourselves, patient with God, trust with God, that it doesn't really have to be accomplished in our lifetimes. We've talked about it. Just a second, and I'll get back to you, Robert. We've talked about God's relationship with Abraham not that long ago. And Abraham was content to see God's promises fulfilled in his heirs, through his heirs. Didn't have to happen to him in his lifetime. And that's part of his faith that we should adopt. Yes, sir.
Thinking along the line, as an elder in the church, doing God's will, meaning planning ahead. Sometimes some things planned for tomorrow, some for next week, next month, next year. And planning their goals and try to get the best to reach them, but things always come up that can make that change. And I think that's also, as I look back at my life, my goal was to get through high school. I made it. And my goal was to get through college, especially when I went to Pepperdine. The same, my brother was a year ahead of me. So at that time in the 60s, private school, tried to go to it instead of to a state school for 1/3 the price. But, kept after it. That's where I became a member of the body. So goals are good. Goals can be great, but they are just goals. And sometimes that goal changes too.
Yes.
There's reasons for it to change. So as far as I am personally concerned, when I look at the Bible and look at God and Jesus and all that, it comes back to me that everything I have, everything that I am, is due to God. So once I acknowledge that, then it seems like life is just a whole bunch better. That I'm more content. I'm more. I don't know what other words to use, but it's better. And people that don't have God, I don't know how they can get through the day sometimes. Without it, you're struggling against yourself or other people, and it seems like there's nobody there to help you. Whereas with God, so this really does kind of hit home to me in that sense, that God has the glory for my life, the way it's gone through for almost 80 years now. Looking for God, I wouldn't be wearing that, I'm sure. I have no question about that. But yet there's other people that look what I did. I went to school, I got my degree. Now I'm working this Fortune 500 company, and it just seems, I can't see the glory, or I can't understand the concept I. It seems like you're not able then to acknowledge that greater power that lives in all of us.
It's all good points. There is this need, I think, to have ambitions, to have goals, but we have to come in, and that should be the goal ultimately, is to see God's will done. And if that is the goal, then how it comes about through us can certainly change as we go through life. So if you're, you have a lot of churches do have vision statements, and they get together and they say, this is our 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan. This is where we're going to go. Now, I'm not saying that's bad. I am saying that there needs to be an understanding that God may take your congregation in a very different direction. You may start out, we're going to be the hip, cool church with a bunch of young people, and we're going to, everybody looks cool and acts cool, and we're the cool guys. And then you find yourself with a very different membership. And
Get old.
even cool people get old if they're lucky, right?
If they live long enough.
If they're lucky enough to live long enough, they get old. I was at the airport, in San Diego a couple of years ago, and there was an older gentleman there with a young man. I think it was his grandson, but I'm not sure. But the younger man was kind of helping the older man get situated and comfortable and everything at the airport. And he's fit, he can bounce around and all that. And I struck up a very brief conversation with the older man, and basically we determined that if that guy's lucky enough, he'll be where that older man is one day. You got to be lucky to be an old person that needs help from. If you're not lucky, you won't live that long. And that's kind of maybe a way of looking at it too. But if we have an overarching, if the primary goal is to honor God with our lives, then the other goals, the lesser goals, should be very flexible. And they should be, okay, we're going to do this, but we get there and that's not what's going to happen. We need to do something else. So it's really about, I think, having the humility to really surrender yourself to God's will. And I think that's not something that is really taught or embodied in a lot of mainstream Christian contexts in America, within the Churches of Christ or with any other group. I mean, we really want people that have a vision and are going to do it, and it doesn't matter. No obstacle will stand between us and that goal. And that's fine in the corporate world or in some other settings in the world, but that's not how God's people work. Paul had his goals and his visions, and he got turned aside left and right. Philip and the Ethiopian, that story occurs. Philip is in Samaria, and things are going great. He's killing with his ministry there. And then he gets sent to a desolate road out in the middle of nowhere for one person. That's what God wanted. As the Spirit led him there. That's how God wanted him to do it. So it's these goals, these plans, these visions are fine as long as they're made in submission to God's will. If the Lord wills, we will do this and we will do that. And if you think you're going to make it happen no matter what, that is your arrogance. And James says that is evil. So when it comes to long-range plans, pardon to those who are watching the video there, these people have to see me wipe my nose every now and then. You shouldn't have to, but you did there. When it comes to embodying God's will in our lives, we need to be subject to that will and not really think, and be careful to discern what is our will and what is God's will. So, any other thoughts on that passage before we move into chapter 5? And I blow my nose again.
That's one thing every day in my prayers in the morning, I ask the Lord to open my eyes and let me see what He wants me to do, not what I think I should do. to do, but it's so hard to know if it's me that's telling you or if it's the Lord that's actually wanting to work in your life. And I have a hard time knowing what He wants me to do next.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a couple of things that I just really felt moved to do, but I know there's a lot more that I need to do. And this last week or so, I've been trying to go through all of my stuff in the basement. I'm trying to clean it out. But I've been going through it. I kept thinking, I don't need all these birthday cards. At one point, I thought I was going to use them all and make it a couple cards. Nope, I'm not going to do that. They're going. But I open them up and I read some of them, and I've kept them because some of them are thank you cards and people telling me thank you for helping me to do such and so, and being able to come and stay with them and help them get on their feet again. Some of it, I don't even remember that I've done it. I said, when did this happen? I'm not sure. And I just, I was sitting there last night almost confused because some of them were just so moving. So I stick them in a pile to keep. But there's so much I still want to do. And some of it I'm not able to do. I would just love to be able to be to a point where I can go down and help my sister. Because she's going blind and she has so many health problems. Her husband's not helping her. He can't do something. Except that he doesn't support her when his daughter comes over and yells at Cheryl because she's thinking Cheryl's, the reason her dad's dying is because Cheryl's not keeping the house clean. Give me a break. Cheryl's blind. She can't see the
Can't see whether it's clean or dirty.
And the lady comes over. Does she help her dad? Her mom? His wife? No. She just comes over to yell. But Lauren doesn't support Cheryl over it. He doesn't tell the daughter that, okay, this is enough. I said, you know what? You need to stand up for yourself and tell her. Either shut up and put her mouth or, I'm terrible. Yeah.
I hope this isn't going out over the internet, Connie badmouthing her family and everything.
I tell you, I just really got angry with this girl. I wish I could come there and tell her what's what. And if she shut up and come and help clean the house, or just, put beds on Cheryl, it's not her fault. Her husband's dying because he won't quit smoking a pack a day. And his lungs are going, He's not dying.
He didn't want to be a quitter.
Destruction is what it is.
Maybe it's not your job either.
Yeah. That's Dolores was hit on. It's if arrogance is trying to insert our will into everything, then it is humility that says, I can't do everything. It's not up to me to do everything. And I think as a congregation, a small congregation in a kind of a rural setting like we have here, we need to be of service to the Lord. I think to serve our neighbors, be people who can help, but we can't do everything, can we? Even in a small community like this, we can't. There's so many works that are needed that we can maybe participate in.
Sometimes you cannot help family because family does not want your help.
No, it's a lot of issues when you start.
Back off and say, okay.
That's why Dolores carries that big stick. She can just whack them upside the head if she needs to. So it's a practice of discernment, discerning what God's will is, discerning what you can do, how He has empowered you, I guess, in a sense, to act. Has God given me the gift, the resources, the opportunity to serve in a certain capacity? And yes, God can take our meager resources and He can take a sack lunch and feed thousands of people. So it's not that He can't do it with whatever we have, but sometimes we look at it and we don't even have the sack lunch. We don't have really where it's not what we haven't been called, we haven't been gifted in a way that allows us to serve in a certain capacity. When you look at the temptation of Christ in the wilderness, Satan wants Jesus to turn rocks into bread, right? Why doesn't Jesus turn rocks into bread? He was sent there to fast, right? Not to eat. He's capable. He can turn water into wine. He can turn rocks into bread. But he has been sent there not to eat, not to show how good a baker he is. He's been sent there to fast, and by doing something he's not called to do, he would be saying, God, I don't believe in you to give me my daily bread. I'm going to have to go out and make my own daily bread. So it would be a sign of, it's a lack of trust in God to go beyond your calling, really. It's saying that if I don't do it, it won't get done, rather than, that's not what I can do. That's not my calling. I trust God to get it done through someone else. I mean, the story of Esther in the Bible, it's famous for this. For such a time as this is the statement that kind of resonates with a lot of folks today. That Esther was put in that place for such a time as this. But her dad tells her the same thing, though, that he tells her, what? If you don't do it, God will do it. God will not let his people suffer in this way. So you've been put in an opportunity to serve. If you don't serve, somebody else will. So there's this balancing act to fulfill our calling and be humble enough to say, that's not my calling. Something that's not my calling is not my calling. And let God work on it through somebody else in his own way, however God wants to do it. Let him handle it. It's not, he hasn't chosen you or empowered you to do it. And that's the difficult, like I said, God works through our weaknesses. So it's a process of discernment. And I think the first key to that is humility. And one source of humility for all humans should be knowing that we're not going to be here that long. There's really nothing more arrogant than thinking, I want to control how other people live after I die. Why do you care what they do after you're gone? It's not going to affect you at all. You have that problem? Well, get over it now.
I do. I tell her I gotta get this house clean. When I die, somebody will come and clean. Oh, they can't come and clean this house. They want to see how dirty it is.
You won't care now. Tell her that.
Well, that's not exactly what I'm talking about now. There, it's kind of wanting to relieve others of burdens rather than trying to manipulate how they live their daily lives.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The reason the ladies went to the grave of Jesus on Sunday after he was buried on Friday afternoon, they took spices and ointment, and ladies might have been just married as different accounts. All the accounts differ a little bit, but they didn't want people. It was a community grave. It wasn't just his grave. There were going to be other people buried in there. It wasn't even dug for him, was it? It was somebody else's grave. So they're going to be burying other people in there. So people are going to have to go in that grave as his body is decomposing. The ancient world, it probably happened pretty quickly, and with all the arid weather and all that, it probably wasn't as bad as it could be. But you anointed that dead body to try to tamper down the smell. And it was a sign of love that somebody took care of your body that way. Those ladies did not want people thinking Jesus died unloved. They didn't know he'd already been intended to that way. His body had already been anointed and all that. They didn't mummify like they do in Egypt. They bury the same day. So there's nothing wrong with having a legacy, leaving a legacy. And there's nothing wrong with providing for people after you're gone. But to try to control and manipulate, when you can't even really control and manipulate the world you're in right now while you're here. You can't make people do what you want right now. So why do you think you should be able to do it 10 years after you're dead? That's because you think you're so great, I guess. I mean, how great I art. The arrogance that's involved in that. So It's one thing to kind of care for and provide. Sometimes people with large amounts of money will set their inheritance up for somebody in a certain way so that person can't hurt themselves too badly. You know, the spendthrift, if they get all that money at once, they'll kill themselves, basically. So I need to let them get it over time. So that is a form of providing for them after you're gone. It's another thing if they have to meet your approval to do everything. You know, they can't do what you don't like. Well, you know, it's a discernment, and I am not judging anyone in particular over that. But we need to ask ourselves, why are we doing these things? Why are we trying to control things after we're gone? I took an elderly lady to a political party dinner up in Port Townsend many years ago. She was in her late 80s, and we had a guest who was a lady who was in her late 90s. And they both wanted to go to this function. So I took them there. And for the life of me, I don't understand why either one of them really wanted to go. You know, what does our political outcome, how does elections in America go, really going to affect these ladies? You know, they've got all the money they need, or, you know what, you know, it's not going to change their lives at all. At some point, you'd think you'd want to just, I'm going to do whatever I want to do, and y'all do whatever you want to do, and I don't care. You can't affect me. But that's not how she felt about it. That's not how either one of them. One of them didn't live another year. It was the last year of her life. The younger of the older ladies is still alive. So, you know, to live in the moment, to realize your life is brief, is a sign of humility. And it's okay to have goals and ambitions and dreams, and they need to be in keeping with God's will being done. And if you do that, it's not arrogant, it's not boasting, but the what you say and how you respond when you get setbacks or it looks like it's not going to happen, that also reflects where you are with God. Any other thoughts? And we'll move on briefly to chapter 5. Okay, let's just look at the first 6 verses of James chapter 5. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have rusted, and their rust will be a witness against you, and will consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. Behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, and which has been withheld by you, cries out against you. And the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You have lived luxuriously on the earth and led a life of wanton pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and put to death the righteous man. He did not resist you. Okay, what do you think about that?
We see people doing that all the time now, where they're not paying the people that have worked for them. You know, we see it in fraud things that we get talked about on the news and stuff, where people have worked and worked and they're not getting paid what they're supposed to be paid. And it affects them and their families and their whole community. And so the person that's doing this, that's holding back and using the money for themselves for something that should have been spent for, they're the ones that the Lord's going to be coming down on pretty hard at some point. And they're going to weep and howl, but the Lord's not going to listen to them. He's listening to the ones that are being hurt.
He hears the cry of the oppressed. He does not hear the whining of the oppressors. And it's I got in the handout, I mentioned that it sounds like James is getting ready to organize a labor union. It's, and a lot of investors and companies and everything, they hate unions. And yet you can go back and see how the company treated its employees early on. And if they had been better and more generous and everything to their employees from the get-go, they wouldn't be dealing with the unions they're dealing with now. I don't think too many workers like paying dues to unions.
No.
They don't like seeing that come out of their check. At the same time, if there weren't unions, if they never could work collectively and negotiate collectively, a lot of employers would just never want to pay anything beyond what they absolutely had to pay, and would amass enormous amounts of wealth. So we can see it now. You could really see it about 120, 130 years ago when the Industrial Revolution took off, and you had all of these barons, these megalomillionaires of the time, and their very conspicuous consumption, the enormous mansions that were built on very high-end real estate, some of it in New York, some of it on surrounding areas and lakes. And in the handout, again, I mentioned one up in Victoria. If you ever get to go up to Victoria, you might want to look at the Craigdarroch Castle up there. And it's a beautiful building. It's been probably 15 years or more since I was there, so it was needing work when I was there, and it may need it more now. But this guy, Robert Dunsmuir, was a coal baron in the area, and he made so much money. He built this building, and you could not rebuild it today because he used a lot of woods from all over the world, rare woods the trees are now protected. You can't harvest them and you can't export them out of the country they're in now. You absolutely could not reproduce that building right now, not legally anyway. And there's no telling what it really cost in those days. And if you adjust that for inflation and what it would cost in today's, it would be a staggering sum. And it is a museum now, and you can tour it. And one of the things they have up on the walls is a newspaper article of the time where the local newspaper is saying, look what you're doing. Look at this house you're building. Your own workers can't afford the coal. They're digging out of the ground. And the people are freezing to death in the winter. Victoria gets pretty chilly in the winter. We get pretty chilly too, but they get it too. And all these workers couldn't heat their own homes. He died before the building was complete. And he's tearing down his barn. He's building bigger barns. And guess what? Tonight, your soul is required of you. So, and I'm not fanning the flames for union. I'm not Norma Ray. I'm not trying to do all that. And a lot of companies, when they're starting out, they don't have the means to pay their employees really well. But they may have things like stock options and other things they can do that where the employees are made partners really with management. And if the company succeeds, they will succeed down the road. And I think that's a very different business model than the one James is talking about, the one Connie mentions, which is you can pay them, or maybe, and I think this is what happened a lot in America, is you have created a monthly expensive lifestyle that you really can't sustain. You certainly can't sustain it legitimately. People who complain about immigrants coming over here, but have immigrants working for them, taking care of their kids, cutting their grass, doing a lot of stuff around the house. Why? Because they don't want to pay. Well, Americans won't do it. A lot of Americans won't do it for what you're paying, what you want to pay for someone to mow your lawn. And maybe you don't need that big McMansion where you have all of this yards you can't take care of. If you can't pay for it legitimately, maybe you shouldn't have it. So, workers are due a fair wage by their employers. And it's an injustice and a form of oppression to not give it to them. And the wealth they amass as a result of that is all the evidence God is going to need at the day of judgment to say, look at what you did. And at the end of verse 4, just kind of an important note, I think. Excuse me, my allergies are going crazy today. Then in chapter 4, James refers to the Lord as the Lord of Sabaoth. That is not the Lord of Sabbath, that is, or the Lord of rest, that is the Lord of the armies of the Lord. It's a military term. And, we look and we got a big, scary war going on in Europe right now, and it looks like it's going to escalate. I'm hearing stuff like in the spring, after the winter thaw and the spring rains dry out, watch out. It's really going to be something to behold next spring. It's the war. They haven't even really gotten started yet, basically. And that may be the case. I don't know. It's scary, but the armies of the Lord could end the war tomorrow. They could end the war right now if they wanted to end it. So we have a much more fearsome advocate if we're with him, and a much more fearsome opponent if we are against him. And that's a warning to all those who are living luxuriously on the earth. They're really storing up themselves the treasure where it will rust, where it will decay, where moths will eat it. I mean, this is stuff right out of Jesus' teaching that James is using here. And as they hold on to those decaying, tarnishing, rusting treasures, the decay and the tarnish and the rust is coming into them. It is rusting them out. It is making them decay. They are suffering spiritual necrosis. They are dying because of their desire to amass wealth in a way that's not consistent with God's plans for how humans should treat one another. So it's like I said, it sounds like James is trying to organize a labor union here. We'll come back and look at that a little bit next week, and then get further into and maybe conclude chapter 5 next week. So, okay, and some of y'all, I've handed out the handouts just today for James 5, and the email went out this morning, so we may not have gotten it yet. So, anyway, thank you for your attention and your comments, and Mr. Waite will lead us in a closing prayer.